Welcome into the Hear Me, See Me podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Bruner. Hear Me, See Me is a mental health awareness initiative here at WIBW TV and Gray Media, and we are proud and honored to be bringing these stories to light. Our veterans, the men and women who have served our nation, our first responders included as well, have some very unique needs and challenges when it comes to mental health and wellness, both before, during, and after service. That has been recognized time and again. And when we think about our rural areas, it can be an added challenge because there's not as much access to those services. That is where Together with Veterans comes in. Jim Crosby has spearheaded the Together with Veterans and Morris County group here in the state of Kansas, toward the central part of our state, the small community and proud community of Council Grove. Honored to have you with us, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Melissa. I appreciate it.
It is an important discussion because even just in our immediate Topeka area alone, I keep seeing social media posts time and again, and it seems especially over this past year, of people who have served in combat later losing their lives to suicide. What is your service history? You've served our state and our nation very well.
I did. I actually spent 10 years on active duty. Met a young lady from the Council Grove area. We got married actually in Denmark, and then moved back.
The country of Denmark?
The country of Denmark,
okay.
Absolutely. She flew over, and then we moved back to Kansas. I went to school at Kansas State University, got a degree in education, and then was hired full-time by the Kansas Army National Guard, where I served another 24 years. So 34 years of service altogether, various positions throughout the state. With
34 years of service, did you deploy or was it all stateside?
I actually deployed twice. First time was to Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield. My wife and I had been married 2 days when we found out on TV that I was deploying. And the second time, 2009 to 2010 to Afghanistan.
My goodness. What did you see while you were over there?
I saw how lucky we are here to have all of the freedoms at our fingertips that I think a lot of people take for granted. You know, Afghanistan, it's not unusual for families. They live communally, and it's not unusual for them to feed 30 to 40 people one meal a day on less than $1 a day. And we can drive down the street and go to Red Robin or McDonald's or anything else. We saw a lot of ingenuity. I had never seen water run uphill until I met an engineer in Medellin province, and he actually, with backflow, had water run uphill so they could irrigate about another 4,000 acres of wheat. So interesting.
Along with the interesting, though, were there things that you would prefer you did not see, or were you fortunate to not have had some of those stories?
There were things that, you know, we were involved with that, you know, you respond to things. There was the mayor of Medellin and his family were killed in a car bombing that you respond to. There was a prison that was overrun by the Taliban, and we responded to it. But some of the good things, because we were a Kansas unit, we were on an agribusiness development mission. And so when people realized they were there to help, we were stopped several times from hitting IEDs by the local populace. So it was a give and take, us being there for the right reason and them wanting to make sure that we completed our mission.
Describe, though, that state that puts you in when you know that going down the street, if someone doesn't warn you, the story could end very differently.
I think that for the most part, a lot of your pre-deployment training, and then when you get into country and you get intel briefs, it's a constant state of awareness and readiness because you don't know what's going to happen. I think you'll often not hear about the times where something like that happens and your training immediately kicks in and you just do what you're trained to do, which also leads us to when you're wired that way for 34 years and then you retire, it's almost like you've lost your sense of purpose and it takes a while for you to refocus on what's important.
I was going to ask what that's like, how that translates when you come home. Not just that part of it, that post-deployment, but you come back and even if you are still enlisted or still serving in the military, still serving with the Guard, but yet you're here in an area where you know you're safe, but do you know you're safe? When you've lived on this deployment where you're constantly on alert, can you easily make that transition to once again being a state of calm?
I don't think it's I wouldn't use the term easy. It takes time. It takes time for you to realign to, hey, I'm back someplace where it's safe. What you don't want to do is have your 7-year-old daughter blow up a McDonald's bag and pop it in the back seat while you're driving, because you immediately go to defensive driving mode. And that happened. Interesting to swerve all over a road over by Ottawa when you don't need to. But yeah, I think it takes time for you to, we always called it go green. You know, you go green, Mitch, you're in that posture, you're ready, and it takes you time to get out of that as well.
The time that you served, did anybody prepare you for that?
I think we have done, overall in the military, an amazing job of preparing our people to deploy. I know on our particular mission, we actually spent time at Kansas State University, not only with the ag folks that are there who were our reach back and just did a tremendous job the whole time we were there, but we were also to have, we also got 5 days of language training to know the basics of language, which then helped us as we got into country. We had 6 interpreters, but there were times when your interpreters weren't available, so you could do the basics. But I do overall, I think that our military does a tremendous job of preparing us to deploy.
But what about coming home?
Coming home is different. It's different. You go to you go to a weekend training, and then you go, where is everybody? You know, I often laugh. My wife and I had a joke when I came home, because for 13 months I went to the dining facility to eat. I didn't worry about it, and she would ask me, where do you want to eat? I don't care. That's not a decision. You know, it's just pick a place and we'll go. So those menial decisions are even hard to get into when you get back.
That's where Together with Veterans comes in, and I'm going to dive into why you decided to get involved in a little bit. But first, I want to know what it is you do. Together with Veterans and Morris County.
So Together with Veterans in Morris County is a grassroots effort to bring awareness to the stigma of mental health and to provide training on the signs and symptoms of suicide. We started a little over 4 years ago, and we have, I think, made great roads. People talk about it. You know, the big thing, and we discussed this a little bit ago, is the more you talk about something that people believe is taboo or a stigma, it becomes normal. And so that's our big goal, is we always want to talk about those signs, those symptoms, talk about mental health, where it's provided, how we can get you assistance. And that becomes important, because at the grassroots, when you know all of your neighbors, we've done over 600 trainings for 600 people, trained them on the signs and symptoms. And with that, we've taken a little over 80 phone calls. And I can sit here and tell you that there are probably 7 people walking around in Morris County because a neighbor simply cared and they called. And that includes 4 veterans, 1 other adult, and then 2 young people, 2 15-year-old kids that attend school in Morris County.
And for those who aren't familiar with Morris County, there aren't a lot of people there. So to say that 7 people directly are impacted like that is actually a pretty big deal. Together with Veterans, your chapter is really part of a nationwide or larger grassroots movement, is that correct?
It is. So the Together with Veterans program started about 7 years ago, and it's a Veterans Administration program. And you sign, you say, hey, we're gonna volunteer to do this. There are 38 what we call communities nationwide, but that term community is used loosely. The largest area of a community is the whole Upper Peninsula of Michigan, plus 3 counties down in the thumb of Michigan, and then ours, which is by far the smallest, with Morris County has 5,300 people. But since then, we've branched out to the surrounding schools. And with that charter that we first started does come funding. We received $100,000 in funding over 3 years from the Veterans Administration. But the great part of living in a small community with all the events that we did, our local county and the city council in Council Grove, we came out after 3 years in what's called sustainment, which means you're going to sustain yourself. At the end of 3 years, we still had over $94,000 left because of everything that was donated to us.
That's amazing. And this was first initially targeted toward veterans, but you mentioned you're in schools.
Yes.
What has that experience been like, and what do you impart to teenagers? Our teenagers like military veterans. It's kind of interesting.
Yes. Well, our title, together with Veterans and Morris County, the "and" is capitalized because we saw the stigma just isn't with military when it comes, it's very indiscriminate. So we decided that we would target our civilian populace as well. Morris County, 5,300 people, we were able to get numbers together from certain things that says basically about 22% of our population is veterans or those still currently serving. So if you extrapolate that out into our schools, you have about 20% of our kids who deal with veterans as well. So we started at the adult level, did a lot of trainings, and then we transitioned into the schools. We were originally only going to stay in Morris County with USD 417 at Council Grove. And then we went up to talk to the school board up at White City. Well, they're a combination with White City and Hope for Rural Vista. And they asked, well, can we do this in Hope as well? Well, we're not going to say no. So then you realize now we drive right by Harrington. We drive right by Center. We have kids from Morris County who go to school at Chase County and North Lyon County. So we have just expanded basically from having a sphere of influence of about 900 kids to 2,200 kids. And we're still building some of those partnerships. We have 4 of the schools who have said, absolutely, we want you. And then the other 2 we're still building that partnership with.
And for those, a lot of people may not necessarily know, how does this happen in Kansas? Why do you have all these military families? We have Fort Riley in Manhattan, Kansas, and as those families either transition out of active duty service, a lot of them are drawn to our smaller rural communities around here, and Council Grove isn't too terribly far from Fort Riley, neither are those other locations you mentioned. So that's why we have a lot of military families around Kansas, either current or former military. Your son served as well?
My son, Camise, we basically, we lived in Pomona at the time, and I was the operations sergeant in Ottawa at the 127th Field Artillery, and our daughter Taylor and Camise were in the same class at Pomona High School, and he came to our house one day, and he basically never left. He was in a situation where he's living with his grandmother and his brother and his uncle. Way too much testosterone in the house, and I had all girls, so we basically adopted him, and he went to school. He went to play football at 2 junior colleges in Kansas, and then after he left there, he decided he was going to join the military.
And that's where this story takes its turn. So we are going to find out what Camise's story is and how that inspired Together with Veterans and Morris County in just a moment. We are back here on the Hear Me, See Me podcast with Jim Crosby, one of the driving forces behind Together with Veterans and Morris County. You were just telling us about your adopted son, Camise, your son. He had served in the military, as did you. So where did Camise serve and what was his history?
So Camise decided to join the military, and he chose the job of a geospatial engineer. The big joke in our family is who had the higher ASVAB score, and by far he did. Just a very intelligent young man. He joined the Guard, went to basic training and his advanced individual training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Came back and was assigned to the 130th Field Artillery Brigade in Manhattan. And after about a year and a half, we were in need of some help in the shop that I worked at. So Camise was able to come on orders, and it was amazing just to work with him every day. I got to see him every day, and he did a great job for us. But after a long weekend, he didn't show up for work one day, and so I called my wife and I said, "Have you heard from Camise today?" And she said no. So he lived here in Topeka. So I drove to his apartment, and when I got there, loud music playing, and I thought, man, I'm going to drag this kid out of bed and kind of rip him. But I walked in and he had hung himself.
How old was he?
He was 25.
25.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any signs at the time, and whether you knew it at the time, or is it looking back now?
No, Camise led he was the kid that he would walk into a room and he would light it up, smile, hug everybody he knew. The Thursday before he died by suicide, him and his girlfriend had adopted a cat. But what we didn't know were about the years before he came to us. We didn't find out about those years until the day of his funeral. And there were some very, very traumatic things that happened to him as a young man that had we known, we could have gotten him some help.
He never said anything.
He never said a word. He was always the most happy-go-lucky kid, like nothing was ever wrong, which is what most people who have thoughts of suicide do. They put on that facade so nobody knows that internally they're hurting.
Did he ever deploy through his military service, or was he doing projects here?
No, he was only within the state. There were some things that he did for our logistics department, like as a geospatial engineer, he was able to create maps out in Salina for the Kansas Training Center out there, and then create some maps for some local training areas that the Guard still uses. So he got to do some of the things that he did, but for the most part, they were expected to deploy in January following his death, and his unit deployed after that.
So for him, it wasn't necessarily the transitional experiences that you had that make you understand why veterans can be at additional risk. These were the pressures of past trauma, of situations that you at the time knew nothing about.
And it was childhood trauma, which led us to, after we got to that adult piece, thinking about those things is what made us decide to go into our schools. I mean, if you look at the majority of the schools where we're at, demographically, possibly socioeconomically disadvantaged, a lot of kids on free and reduced lunches, both parents working just to make ends meet, and all of those are red flags when it comes to the potential for suicide.
Why are those red flags? I think some people would say, well, I came from a not very economically advantaged background, and I don't understand what you're talking about. What could happen and what might happen when a child is growing up in an environment where they maybe don't have access to some of the things other kids have?
I think our kids are, a lot of times we don't give our kids credit for how much they know and how much they realize in our lives. So, if you're a family of 5 or a family of 6, and you're at that socioeconomic disadvantage, perhaps that oldest or next child say, I'm part of the problem because I'm one of the 5 or 6, and mom and dad are having to work really hard. Or maybe because mom and dad are both working, now I have the responsibility of taking care of my siblings, and that's a huge responsibility. So there are so many things that go on with our kids, and then you just get into the school piece with, we have an 11-year-old granddaughter who I couldn't keep up with her calendar. It's just swim club and dance and softball and on and volleyball camps and on and on and on. Now put that kind of a burden on a 14, 15, or a 16-year-old with many siblings, and it could be mentally taxing.
And yeah, you don't want to blame, you can show all the love in the world and think your kids are doing fine and it's what they want to do, but it's, kids internalize pressure a lot.
They do. They
so
absolutely
even
do.
though you may not, you aren't putting the pressure on the child to feel like they have to take care of siblings, and you're not telling the child that, man, the parents probably aren't saying out loud, gosh, if we didn't have kids, they love their kids. They wouldn't trade their kids for the world, even if it is a little bit of an economic challenge. But kids, like you said, can blame themselves and internalize it. So how do parents and adults counteract that feeling that kids might be putting on themselves?
I believe that, like I said before, our kids are smart. A simple explanation can go a long ways for a kid. A lot of parents, and I say this, and believe me when I say that, I have 5 children, and I would never want to put my kids at a disadvantage, never. But militarily, the number of birthdays and anniversaries and holidays that I missed alone, we literally would sit down with our kids to make them understand, this is why I'm going to be gone. And for parents that aren't military, it could be as simple as, we need to work to provide your basic necessities, a roof over your head, food in your mouth, clothes on your back. And I think that, for me, that's probably as simple as explanation as I can give.
How long did it take you As a survivor of suicide, there are struggles as well for those left behind. What, for your family, was that process like? You didn't automatically come out the next day and walk out of your son's funeral and say, we're going to start this organization, I imagine.
No, we actually, we were asked twice to get it started. And I simply said no, I wasn't ready mentally. You know, we talk about stigma. And in the military, you know, mental health used to be a reason why people would get chaptered out of the military. They'd be put out of the military. After about 4 months, I was not in a really good place. But thankfully, I have a great mental health team. I say this, my wife is the head of my mental health team because she is a Kansas farm girl and she's a phenomenal person. Sue will be married 35 years this year, and I often wonder how she tolerated it. But I also have my therapist, Christy Godley, who's on our steering committee. And then I have my pastor, Christy Alexander, who's on my steering committee. And then I have my doctor, Laura Siegel. And I'll talk to people and I'll tell them that, and they're like, Jim, you have 4 women on your mental health team? I was raised by my grandmother and my mother. And women have the inherent ability to understand, whereas men try to hide those feelings. I'm open and honest about it. I take a small dose of medication every day. It calms me down, and when I don't take it, I can tell, my wife can tell, my family can tell. So, but it took me to go to my doctor for her to look at me and say, Jim, I think you're depressed. And I'm like, I'm not taking your medication. So what does she do? She says, move over a seat. So I move over, and she goes, knowing what you know now, if Camise was sitting there, what would you do? And I said, write the prescription.
But it took Camise's death for you to seek help?
It did. Up until that time, it had been ingrained that you internalize it, you fix it yourself. But understanding what he had been through and then getting somebody, you know, like I said, my wife, my pastor, my therapist, and my doctor to all say, you know, my doctor, my pastor, and my wife are first. The therapist came in last. But she did a great job of getting me to understand that there are coping mechanisms. There are times now where I still journal about things that bother me. And I journal it, I put it down for a day or two, and then I read it again so I can understand what those coping mechanisms are.
How long then, even after that, did it take before you were willing to really talk about it and to go ahead and say, I'm going to use what happened to me, I'm going to use what I myself experienced to help others?
So after about 6 months, seeing a therapist twice a month, I was finally able to break down and really share some things with my wife. And then about probably another 4 or 5 months after that, we had a young man in Council Grove who died by suicide that I had coached. And I went and I told my wife, I said, you know, we've been asked a couple of times. I just can't sit back and allow this to keep happening. You know, now, are we ever going to stop it? If it was God's plan for there to be an ability to stop something, I hope this would be it. But at least this way you have skin in the game. You're trying to give people the knowledge, tools, and resources to battle the stigma and to battle suicide. And the more people you give that knowledge, tools, and resources to, hopefully, you know, they see it and they say something. And that is the biggest key. You know, all of our research says that the number one reason why people choose not to die by suicide is because one person cared. Now imagine if you have a neighbor who sees it and they say something, and then they call somebody and they call the individual, or we've had 3 or 4 people on our steering committee call somebody. Now you don't have one person, you have a group of people who are saying, you don't believe it, but if you're gone, there are people that will miss you immensely. You know, our whole family does that all the time. July 31st will be the 6-year anniversary of us losing our boy. And there's not a day goes by that I don't think about the situation and that I don't miss him. But we're trying to turn that tragedy into something that another family doesn't have to go through.
What would be step one? And when you talk about actions that maybe we should take or things we should be looking for, so all of us with our friends and loved ones, what would be step one that we should do?
I think the first thing is even if you do your own research or do anything, there are certain red flags. You know, somebody talking about it, we should take every threat seriously. Every threat. If it's in a joke, I really don't, you know, I don't care if it's even a joke. I will ask somebody, hey, are you okay? You know, are you having thoughts? The next thing is, you know, everybody has those possessions that they love. When you see somebody wanting to give possessions away, that is a huge red flag. People pulling away, or maybe you see increased alcohol use, or if somebody's just not themselves, those are all the red flags that people need to look at. One of the hardest things when we do our training is we do the Veterans Administration SAVE training. SAVE is signs, ask, validate, and then expedite. So you can do all the signs. The hardest part of that is, are you really prepared to ask somebody if they're going to have the potential to end their life? You know, a lot of those people that we have talked to, they had exhibited those signs. And then when you call them or you go to see them, our very first one, that Rebecca Elias, who's the commander of our Legion and also on our steering committee, we went and sat in one of our local attorney's office for 6.5 hours. And finally, after about 4 hours, we asked him, do you have a plan? And he said, yes, I do. Well, when were you? He goes, well, I was planning on doing it tonight, but you interrupted us. Not tonight, buddy. So we were able to get a hold of his family, and he went to the VA and went to a 6-week inpatient, and he seems to be doing amazingly well.
Which is amazing. If you're someone who's struggling, and we should pass along right now, if you're hearing any of this and you're concerned about yourself or a loved one, the 988 crisis line is there. They have a special line for veterans. You call 988, you say you're a veteran, you'll be directed to those specialized services. 988's there for you 24/7. Beyond 988, if you're not ready to pick up the phone and call, maybe you don't think it's a crisis situation, Jim, what would be the number one thing you would suggest for someone who is struggling?
I think that 988, of course, we're extremely proud in Kansas because our 988 number has been funded for 3 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which there are not a lot of states like that, and you hear horror stories where they're not. You know, somebody started dialing at 6 o'clock on Friday and was found at 7 o'clock on Monday morning. They had died from suicide in another state. The biggest thing is to reach out to somebody. Who is the person that you trust the most to talk about what you have? For veterans, it's a lot easier to reach out to veterans. That's why our steering committee is 50% veterans and 50% non-veterans. And we were very intentional in creating that steering committee. It took us 8 months to get a steering committee together because we were so intentional about what we were doing. For veterans, it's reaching out to, you know, I always say I have, I have 3 people that I know if I call, one of them's going to pick up the phone. If you don't have 3, find the one. Mm-hmm. Find the one. If not, 911. Or you call 911 and somebody responds. Those people are going to care about what's going on. You know, I don't think we give enough credit to our law enforcement and our EMS and our fire department as first responders. One of the things we're trying to coordinate now down in Morris County is the I forget what her title is. She's the second in charge of all of the psychological health stuff mm-hmm. here at the VA. She's willing to come down and provide training to them on how to deal with a veteran in crisis. Mm-hmm. That would include people at our hospitals. A lot of people don't understand the statistic we gave out, 22% of your population being veterans. If they're in a crisis, it's much different than needing medical help. They need mental health help.
Yeah, and we're fortunate some of our first responders in our area at least have that crisis intervention training, and there are mm-hmm. CIT teams or mental health professionals can readily be called in and respond along with them. There's so much to this, Jim. And
yeah.
Do you believe the military is doing better today than when you got out in terms of preparing those who serve to come home and or to return to civilian life?
I believe that our military is doing the best they can with the resources that they have. If there was, we hear about so many cuts that are going on due to our budget and our deficit. I don't believe that we can make shortcuts in that area. And if we do, I'll be the first person standing on a politician's desk going, "What are you doing?" It's interesting because we spend so much money preparing and training somebody. Think about some of the longer schools that our guys go to be trained, 52-week schools. They go to basic training. We always used to have a chart that we would kind of guesstimate, so here you have a soldier who's gone through $500,000 of training, and we want to keep them as long as possible, but you don't want to spend a little bit of money to make sure that they're mentally prepared for everything they either are going to see or have already seen. Fiscally, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and I ran the Guard's budget for a lot of years, and in one of our areas we always wanted to make sure was that we have to be prepared. Our family readiness groups and our mental health folks and our clinicians, we need to make sure that they're funded.
What would be your final message to anyone out there? If there's a veteran out there who's struggling, a first responder who's struggling, or a young person, anybody, what do you want them to know?
People care. There are people, whether you know it or not, people care, and they want to help you. Don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but I'll do it. My phone number is 620-767-2516. Even if I don't know you, I will pick up the phone and I will talk to you regardless. Again, it goes back to, we don't want somebody to go through what we went through. And I'm not trying to do that as a sympathy or anything for our family. It is simply that people care about this issue, and we want everybody to know that people care.
And that is a great message to spread. If it's not 988, if it's not Together with Veterans and Morris County, or a Together with Veterans perhaps in your area, on our website, at least, WIBW.com/HearMeSeeMe, is a whole list of resources for Northeast Kansas and some very national organizations that help with various situations as well, because, it's exactly the message that we want everyone to know. We hear you, we see you.